Hey everyone, Medium Man here. This is your host Keegan, and with me today is Ben. Say hi, Ben.
Hi.
So, today our main topic is going to be highlighted with the High Republic and talking about the two newest books that have been, I guess not the two newest books, the first two books released for the High Republic. Before that, we're gonna just start it off with a little bit of news. What do you got for us today?
Not much today, actually. Been a little light on the news. There's some interesting things going on comics that might be more fun to discuss once more has been revealed about them. But more importantly, we've gotten a couple spots, TV spots of the Boba Fett show, and that's looking really good. The most notable thing I would say coming out of that was we got a shot of Boba in a bacta tank, so they are going to explain why he looks better and not
Oh,
as
nice.
scarred.
Good.
So I assume that, getting into Jabba's palace gives them access to Bacta, which is great. I'm glad that they're explaining that. I think Star Wars for a little while now has a habit of not explaining large things like that, and I'm
That's
really glad
true.
to see that that's not going to be the case.
I think they've
Well,
done.
most notably, they didn't really explain the Emperor in the movie. They
Yeah.
later did in the novelization, but I like that they're kind of dealing with those things so it doesn't feel like bits of story are missing.
I
Yeah, I
think
mean, you
that
could.
they've always done kind of, throw something out there and then use something else to explain on the back end, right?
Yeah, yeah. It just felt like recently it was at least to me that it was more like, how did the Emperor come back? Oh, dark science and Sith stuff. It was a little for such a big thing that didn't have build up in the previous two movies. I had wished that they explained something like that.
Yeah.
And this is on a much smaller scale, so this wouldn't have even been as big of a deal. It could have just been like how Kylo Ren's scar moved in the Force Awakens.
Yeah, 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 for sure.
To where it was in the Last Jedi. But here, I'm glad that they explained it. I'm glad that we're seeing kind of his progression back to his former self, so to speak. It's really cool that we're seeing him a lot without the helmet. I mean, we've always known that he's basically an unaltered clone of
Yeah.
Jango Fett, but it's cool to kind of see a prequel character in the OG aesthetic, and we got some of that in The Mandalorian in season 2, and we had Ahsoka, not live action,
Yeah.
other than maybe a little bit of Rogue One, but for the most part, it's just really cool to see that kind of melding of everything together. It's making it feel more complete, and that's something I think the shows are doing really well. It's making Star Wars feel like it's all connected,
Yeah.
rather than the
They've been
first
doing a
six
good job
movies
of
and the
that
pre.
with the series that they've been releasing on Disney Plus. So I'm definitely excited for this new series. I think it's going to be really interesting, and I wasn't super excited for it until I really saw him in The Mandalorian, and then I thought, wow, I could probably watch an entire series about him and his adventures.
Yeah, it's funny because I didn't care at all when they announced it. I was like, oh, really? Can't we get like Obi-Wan first, or Darth Vader, or something new entirely? Maybe Old Republic. Like, I just don't care. And then we saw him in the show, and I was like, okay, okay.
Yeah.
Now, because I always thought he was a guy in cool armor. The prequels gave him a little bit more of a backstory, but I was more interested in the clones and Django more specifically than Boba Fett. But it's really cool now to see him kind of in at this stage in his life, where a lot of people kind of fell in love with the look of the character, and now I'm excited too. When I wasn't before, and I could say the same thing about the Mandalorian show. I wasn't excited when that was announced, and then it ended up being amazing. So
Yeah.
I have a lot of confidence that this is going to be great.
Yeah.
And what's not going to be so great, for those of you that care, is that the Rangers of the New Republic was canceled.
I did hear that because of Gina, right?
I don't think it was because of her. It might have been just kind of a reason tacked onto it, but
Sure.
recently, it's because I don't know how much of a main character she would have been. I think she was going to be in this show, but I don't know if she was going to be the lead, so I'm not sure that that would have mattered. Plus, I kind of feel like her part, if they really had an issue with her, would have been easily recastable. But I liked her character, and I'm a little sad to see that the show's not happening, but I also wasn't too interested in it conceptually to begin with.
Yeah.
So, I get more excited about the underworld and the
Jedi
Jedi
related
stuff,
then.
and I'd be interested in the politics, but the concept, the Rangers of the New Republic, just kind of seeing, these pilots go out to the Outer Rim and stuff, wasn't really something that appealed to me. But it does suck for the people that were excited, and I think Lucasfilm sort of has this habit now, because this is not the first time of announcing something before it's totally set in stone.
Yeah.
I kind of wish that in the future, unless they're gonna give us like a teaser or some footage, they just don't announce it. I know that, because the director of Episode 9 changed from Colin Trevorrow to JJ. The director of Solo changed. It just kind of feels like they're announcing things prematurely before they've ironed out a lot of those creative discussions. And maybe it's possible they just decided they wanted to go in a different direction and maybe explore the ranges of the New Republic characters in a different setting or in another show. Well, we don't really know. We just know that it's canceled. So
Yeah.
sorry for those of you that were really excited about that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Is that it for news though? Do we got more?
Pretty much. There's little things here and there, but I would say that those are the biggest things. I figure
Nice.
you got a lot to say about the High Republic. Since you're the
Yeah,
one that has
I've been taking
so.
notes just so I can remember what the heck happened after. I think I finished these books like a month ago, and my memory just kind of goes away if I don't, immediately start looking at it. Anyway, I can just go ahead and start it off here. So the first book was called Light of the Jedi. And this book let's set the stage for the High Republic first, I suppose. And it takes place 200 years before the episode 1. And with this, the Republic is formed, and I believe the Republic's been around for a little while at this point, but it's just the core. They don't really have anything on like the mid-rim, and definitely really nothing on the outer rim yet. So this whole book is kind of taking place on them setting up this giant space station on the outer rim to try to do like an outreach and show how the outer rim would benefit from becoming a part of the Republic. So
That's interesting.
yeah, go ahead.
That's interesting. I think that we know that at least fails in part because we know that a few of the outer rim planets, like Batu, I believe, is outer rim, and Tatooine.
Yeah.
I think Naboo is, so I'm not too familiar with like the map of the galaxy, but I believe Naboo is either like is in the outer rim or it's really close to it, because we know that in episode 1 they go from Naboo to Tatooine, and that seemed like it was the closest system.
Interesting.
So
I didn't realize that. I always assumed Naboo was kind of one of the inner core worlds.
that's what I would have assumed, but then I don't remember who I was watching. It might have been Eckhart's Ladder or Star Wars Explained or something that made a point that in the movie they go from Naboo to Tatooine, indicating that Tatooine was really close by, and because they needed to stop for fuel and parts.
That's a good point. I didn't even think about that.
So I never thought about that, which it seems obvious now that it's pointed out, but it's not something that like I put together. So it's
Yeah.
interesting to see. Maybe we'll see Naboo come into the fold in these books, or some other planets that we're a little familiar with eventually.
Yeah, I
come
got
into
you.
the Republic.
I don't know the specifics of like what system is what, but I do know that this book takes place in the Hetzal system. With that, like just kind of getting straight into what happens is at the very beginning of the book, there's a cargo passenger ship going through hyperspace trying to transport people to the outer rim. And on this ship in hyperspace, it crashes into something that's unknown at this point in time, and it blows up. When this blows up, it just creates like a whole bunch of problems in the system, because then now you have these pieces of a ship that are spewing out of hyperspace lanes, and they're going at light speed type velocities, and when they hit things at that speed and of that mass, they're like exploding things, and different cities are dying on the outer rim. So
Oh wow.
yeah, so it's a really, really big impact. And they kind of reach out to any of the Jedi that are nearby, and you end up with kind of a handful. And in this book, there's really no main character. So you have Master Avar Kriss, and she is she's like one of the higher up masters, and she's really in tune with the Force. You have Master Elzar, which is actually kind of like a love interest for Avar Kriss, even though they're still on, at this point in time, they have already reached the like no romances in the Jedi, that's no go, but they kind of have that chemistry, and they allude to it a few times that they kind of have deeper feelings for each other. And then on the other side, you have Master Lodin, who is taking his Padawan around, and his Padawan's name is Bell, and this Padawan is pretty much good in like most areas, except for he really can't use the Force to stop himself when falling. He's been saved at pretty much every point in time here. Another kind of main character here is Lena So, and she is the Chancellor right now, and she's the one that's trying to break into the Outer Rim and like secure those planets. So the book goes on a little bit, and you learn about this raider group called the Nihil, and the Nihil use these things called paths, which by using these paths, they can do like really short jumps in hyperspace. And that's how they're able to get away and avoid blockades and things like this. So if you remember the book, I think it's Thrawn Treason, but they have in the Chiss have like these little girls that can essentially see hyperspace lanes, and they're navigators. I don't know if you've heard of these people.
Yeah, they call them Skywalkers, right? And
yes,
they're on alliances as well, so I definitely am familiar.
Yep. So in that, the way I believe this is, I believe it's a similar thing. The person that they are using right now for this is a secret. Only one person within the organization of the Nihil knows this person exists, and he's using these paths to kind of become the leader in this group. The Chancellor then shuts down the hyperspace lanes because people are running into debris on it, and every time someone runs into debris, they explode, essentially, which is just killing lots of people. That being said, a lot of people are extremely angry and want her to lift these bans because they need all their supplies, and they're starting to get low on all the necessary goods to survive. So it's a little bit of a political nightmare for the Chancellor, because she doesn't really have a good option. If she lets people go, then they start blowing up and they blame her. If she shuts it down, then people start starving to death. So it's really a lose-lose situation for her.
Yeah, that's kind of unfortunate. That's definitely a situation where there isn't... The long-term correct answer is probably not to let people go through the hyperspace lanes, but I also understand that people, need those supplies, so it's not going to feel too great when the Central Republic leader is kind of strangling your supply lines, even though that's not the intent.
Agreed, but that's definitely what it feels like to the people on the ground. So they eventually go to Master Kavan, and Master Kavan is like a brainiac of the Jedi Order, and he builds this giant array of navidroids to predict where all these things are going to be falling. And it takes like a significant amount of power, like way more power. It's overheating as they try to turn it on, and he doesn't have as many navidroids as he needs for the brain. So Master Elzar then goes and asks Master Avar Kriss to help him call a storm in. So they go into some deep meditation, and they somehow are able to pull a cloud essentially over this array and shade it, and then make it rain so that it essentially cools it off naturally. And it ends up working, and they can find kind of they end up finding where all the pieces are going to fall now. So with this, the Nihil have also discovered a way to figure out where all these pieces are falling, and they're using it to extort planets and say, like, hey, we know this is going to fall at this location. If you don't, or they don't tell them the location, but they say, if you don't pay us money, we're not going to tell you, and, a bunch of people are going to die. One of the systems actually, like, ends up agreeing, says, fine, we'll pay the money, just don't let it crash on us. And they miscalculate and accidentally still let it crash down, and they kill like 1 billion people. So it's really bad. And at this point, the Jedi Council's getting involved in thinking, should we get involved militarily? And to this point, the Republic has no formal military or any kind of army or anything like that. So there's no formal policing of the universe really at this point. So the Jedi step in, and it falls to a Master Jorah Molly, and she is someone who doesn't speak a lot at the council, but eventually she says, it comes down to her vote, and she says, let's go. She ends up dying on that battle. She does bring down a lot of the Nihil though. So the leader of the Nihil is a guy called Marchion Ro, and he has these other people called Tempest Runners, and the way that they're delineated is through like storm acronyms or vernacular. So there's the Tempest Runner at the top, and then there's a Storm, which is like a little bit less than that. There's a Strike, and just a couple, like everything has to do with storm related terms. But he ends up sacrificing one of the Tempest Runners of the three to prove to them that he is the strongest and he should be leading them. Because Jorah Molly was going out there, getting back to her real quick, the reason it's important that she died is because that she was the master that was going to be in charge of the new space station that was out there. And when she dies, that is ultimately falls that then to Avar Kriss. So she's now going to be the new person in charge of the space station. They end up stopping all the debris from falling, and they kill one of the Tempest Runners and the like army that they have with them. But then that's kind of the end of the book really in that one. So to me, this first book is really just setting the stage for what the entire High Republic is going to be about. And the Nihil are the new threat in the galaxy, and these guys are extremely vicious and fight very dirty, and they have this person that can give them paths which allows them to go in and out, get away, escape, and just cause all kinds of havoc on the system. On the other side, Master Loden with Bell are saving this farm family on one of the planets that they track the Nihil to. They get into this fight, and eventually Bell gets away with one of the youngest family members, and Loden ends up getting captured. So Master Loden gets captured by Marchion Ro, and the book actually ends with him in a cell, and Marchion is torturing other people in a bunch of cells around him in order to not let the Jedi focus and do any force-related activities. He can't call out, he can't think. So he's being tortured, and everybody else around him is being tortured. That's actually kind of how the book ends, and I really think that this book, it was good, but it was really just setting the stage for kind of what I think a lot of the High Republic is going to be about in the future.
Wow. No, that's actually really interesting. It's an interesting first step. The Nihil sound pretty ruthless. They're not Force users though, right?
They are not
some
Force
of them
users. Nope. As far
Okay.
I have not yet encountered one that is a Force user.
It's very interesting. It'll be
But-
interesting to see where they go with it.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think the next book, Into Darkness, is kind of one of the stories because of all the events that have happened in the first book.
I think there's been some speculation that the Nihil actually play a part in the Chosen One prophecy.
Oh, really?
Just because, so the prophecy from Master and Apprentice reads exactly as follows: only through sacrifice of many Jedi will the Order cleanse the sin done to the Nameless. That's the first line, and
Yeah.
that seems, people have speculated that could refer to the Nihil. I don't know that
Interesting.
they would be the Nameless contextually within the books.
Yeah.
So
That-
I find that
that-
interesting. It almost makes it sound like the Chosen One was supposed to kill the Jedi, according to the prophecy, to kind of as atonement for what they had done in the past. Doesn't sound like they've done anything bad yet, at least in this first book, at least in terms of, what could be qualified as sins done to the Nameless, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's pretty interesting.
Yeah. So I think the first book also kind of tried to show that they were still arguing a lot between all of the Jedi, like the upper council. There was a lot of deliberation and not a lot of action. But getting into the second book, and this, I have a little more meat to this because it's not so much of setting the stage. So in this book, it starts off with Reith and his master, which is Jorah Molly, who we know already has died in the first book. This takes place right before they set out to go to the Outer Rim. So at the beginning of this book, Master Jorah tells Reith, hey, we got to go to the Outer Rim. But Reith is a bookworm, only wants to be in the archives, and says, you know what, that sounds horrible. I don't want to do that, but, I'm a good little Padawan, so I'm going to go anyway. Jorah ends up leaving first and arrives on the station, and Reith has to, settle a few things being a Padawan, and then he gets on a separate spaceship where he meets up with a couple fellow Jedi that he didn't know was going to be on there. And those Jedi are Orla, Comac, Dez, and Dez. And one of the interesting things is Orla is a Wayseeker. And what that means is it's someone who doesn't necessarily agree with the Jedi and has decided to not rescind her Jedi Knight, but go out and figure out the Force for herself and then decide if she wants to come back and continue to be a Jedi or if she wants to go on a different path and take a different Force journey. And I didn't know that that's what they were called before this book. Did you?
No, who was called? I'm sorry.
So Orla, she was called a Wayseeker, which is...
No, I've never heard that term before this book.
No, so that's the first time I heard it, and that reminds me of... It's kind of like what I believe Ahsoka did, and she became a Wayseeker who went to find her own path within the Order and within the Force itself. Though I think Ahsoka was a little more definitively like getting out of the Jedi Order, whereas Orla is still kind of in it. It's kind of like what Dooku did when he was like, I'm going to go out and find out some stuff for myself, and ends up turning to the dark side, of course, we know now. But so I think that's what he did. Anyway.
That's interesting. That does sound like it's sort of what Ahsoka did, though, like you said. She still feels like she's firmly like a Jedi. It's interesting that a little fun fact is that she's an Umbaran, which we saw in the Clone Wars. Well, I don't know that we saw actual Umbarans in the Clone Wars, but we know that they were fighting. Pong Krell was pitting the clones against each other on Umbara. It's pretty cool that she's from that planet.
That is cool. I did not know that. Anyway, the vessel crew, the ship they're flying on is called the Vessel, is a dude named Leox, who's the captain, and a girl named Alfie. And they're part of the Binding Guild. So they do runs for cargo, and they have a bunch of ships and things. So they get on this vessel, and they take off, and halfway through their flight, they are told that there's been an accident in hyperspace, and they immediately have to get out. So they exit hyperspace in a very quick fashion and end up in this system in the middle of nowhere. They find an old space station that's been decommissioned a long time ago. Then realize that the sun that's everything is circling here is kind of on the brinks, and it's prone to these giant heat solar flares, and if everybody doesn't get onto the space station, they're gonna die. So they send a signal out, and they radio out to anybody else that might be nearby and say, hey, come to this space station, it could be safe for you. Except everybody on the vessel isn't totally happy with this, because they think, maybe it could be pirates or anybody else in the system, and they're out there alone and have no backup. But they say, we have to save everybody at the end of it, and it is what it is. So they get onto this space station, and it has like an entire forest living on there, tended by a bunch of old droids. And the droids are still working, and they're still tending to all these plants, so there's breathable air in this space station. And something I didn't know is when the Jedi get on, they immediately sense a presence of the dark side. And it seems that plants have a strong affinity with the dark side. I didn't realize that, but apparently they specify in this book that a lot of plants are very strong in the dark side. But then there's a bunch of these strange idols on the ship that the Jedi are like, what the heck are these? They feel like there is a force on them, so they want to study them. They run into this young girl named Nan, who gets kidnapped. Reith has to cut off this guy's hand, and he feels all bad about having to use violent force, because this was the first time that he had to do anything like that. Alfie and Leox are trying to figure out what a bunch of random symbols are on the ship, and Alfie is the young girl whose mother is the head of the Bind Guild, or her adopted mother is the head of the Bind Guild. And she finds out that the Binding Guild is involved in some illegal trades, and her mother, Scorver, is likely involved, or her adopted mother, I should say. Reith then has a vision about getting attacked by another Jedi, and all of a sudden, all the Jedi start getting these like visions of very bad things. they try to make their way further into the station, and one of the door closes and gets sealed away, and the hyperdrive goes off, and when the door opens, Dez is gone, so they believe he's been incinerated by the hyperdrive at this point, which it sounds like a really terrible way to go, but I don't know, maybe not. Maybe it's instant. Who knows?
Could be like, I don't know, getting eviscerated by like the sun or something.
Yeah.
I don't even know that you feel it because it's so intense
So
that
fast, yeah.
it's so fast, yeah. Or like, sorry, a better example would be getting like sucked into a black hole. Probably wouldn't even realize that it's happening.
Yeah, probably so. But anyway, so they believe Dez is dead, and Master Comac is like, keeps questioning why he can't use his and feel negative feelings, because he's like, I feel really sad and I'm not supposed to. He's like, why does the Order try to suppress these very natural feelings? He doesn't think it's right. Eventually, hyperspace gets opened up again, and they start heading back to Coruscant. On the way, they find a broken ship about to explode. They save some people from it, and then back at Coruscant, Comac gets a meeting with the Council about losing Dez, and the Jedi are like, sucks to suck, which enrages Comac. I mean, he is just like, are you fucking kidding me? So they just say, oh, that's sad to hear. Oh well, write up a report about it. And Comac is very angry at like the lack of sympathy at which he receives from the Council.
Yeah, the apathy of the Council. That's interesting to see how far that goes back.
Yeah.
I mean, this is like 200 years before the Phantom Menace, and we know how like disconnected they were.
Yeah.
So it's weird. It's interesting to see this go back even further. Just kind of the interesting implication of this, and I'm sure that the writers have thought about this, is how monumental Yoda's failure truly was.
Yeah.
Because he's seen this sort of thing happen for hundreds of years, and he's done nothing. So he's been pretty what's it called? Laissez-faire leader. Sure. And that's been to the detriment of the Jedi long term. I mean, they stood for a long time, you know,
yeah, but
and then they would go on for another couple hundred years. But it sort of sounds like the seeds of discontent started way before Anakin ever started, you know, having bad dreams about his mother.
Yeah. So this next thing that they do, so those idols that they found that they believed were connected to the dark side of the Force, they took back on the ship with them and brought them back to Coruscant. And this is something I had no idea about, and maybe you did, maybe it's common knowledge and I'm just the dumb one, but the Jedi Temple on Coruscant was originally a Sith shrine.
So I had heard about that in Legends. I did not realize that was canon. That's actually really cool.
Yeah, so
it seems kind of like a massive oversight by the Jedi.
Well, so here's the thing. In the original The Sith Wars, they talk about these a bit. The Sith Wars were a series of wars fought over specific points in the galaxy. And these points, I think they were called Vergences. These Vergences were like incredibly connected to the Force. So one of the highest connected points is the one that the Coruscant Sith Temple was built on. And eventually the Jedi won that point of interest, and they had been on it for the last couple thousand years now. But all the Sith Wars were fought over these Vergences, and they were just points of immense force wielding power, and they had like the veil between, let's say, reality and the Force world was thinnest at these points.
So the Force is really strong in these areas. I guess kind of like the swamp, the Dagobah cave, where
Yep.
Luke goes in and confronts a vision of Vader, and then also where Rey sort of confronts her identity in the pit in The Last Jedi.
Yeah.
On Octo.
Yep. So it's basically
that's really cool.
Saying that all the Jedi temples and Sith temples are built on these Vergences that are all about, you know, extreme force. Anyway, they go down there and they try to cleanse the idols of the darkness. And then, you know, we'll cutting back to Reeth here. He goes and he meets a med droid and learns that his master, Jorah, died fighting the Nihil. And he's pretty broken up about it. And he also lost his best friend, Dez, earlier in the week. So, I mean, he's just kind of going to a dark place himself right now. Alfie then confronts her adopted mother about the the station being used as an illegal transport for goods, feels her adopted mother's lying to her. Then Reith goes to a briefing and learns of the Nihil, and they display a ship, and he recognizes it immediately, and it is Nan's ship, which is the girl that he saved earlier on the space station. So he then puts all the pieces together and realizes that Nan is part of the Nihil. Then Alfie learns her parents were essentially indentured servants to Scorver and the Guild, and they died on that space station trying to buy themselves out of indenturehood. So there's a lot of connections here to this space station. It seems like this space station in the middle of nowhere has like the most that could possibly be happening on it. Then Reith says, I recognize that ship. I gotta go back to the space station and confront Nan. So he goes to the council, asks them, and they say, nah, bruh, you cannot do that. That's a terrible idea. Then Orla, though, when trying to cleanse the idol with her and a bunch of other Jedi masters, they then realize there's nothing. The idols, there's nothing in them. They're empty. So there's nothing there to cleanse. And Orla and Comac realize that they're like, oh no, we gotta go back now. They go back. Before that, they go to Reith and say, hey, Reith, we weren't explicitly banned from going back there. They told us maybe we shouldn't, but they didn't explicitly say no, so let's not ask and go anyway. So Orla, Comac, and Reith go back. When they get back to the space station, the Nihil are all around this space station. They end up sneaking aboard. Reith now falls into the hyperdrive, and then, instead of being vaporized, he gets transported to a planet. On this planet, he finds these giant plant monsters. And then back on the spaceship, all of a sudden, these plant monsters wake up and they start attacking Orla and Comac. Reith finds Dez, and he's all drugged up by these plant monsters. And because he's so drugged, he ends up fighting Reith, which explains the vision that Reith had earlier. These plant monsters are like extremely dark and in the dark side of the Force. They're not really Force users. They're just really evil kind of creatures that they're called Drendir, I think, something like that. Drendir. That's it. Drendir. But they fight them. These guys are really annoying, and these plant guys, you can like cut off their arms and they can like grow them back and stuff. And they realized that the idols weren't the dark side. They were containing the dark side. So they had put all these plant monsters to sleep. And that's what a lot of the forest on the ship happened to be, was all these plant monsters that were just asleep at the time. Reith ends up incinerating a lot of the Drendir with the actual hyperdrive this time. Nan ends up catching Reith surprised, holds a blaster to him. And she's like, I hate you, I hate the world, I hate myself. And she's just Reith realizes immediately, because like they started to kind of have a crush on each other earlier in the book, but then Reith immediately realizes that this girl is absolutely crazy and she has no good left in her. She's all about the hate. But she does end up letting Reith go because she wants to repay her debt for getting saved by Reith earlier in the fight. And this big fight breaks out. They need a distraction, so some of the Drendir that weren't annihilated, they release those Drendir to go fight the Nihil. And Reith says, F it, and opens the airlock and throws everyone on the spaceship out into space. So,
jeez.
Yeah. Anyway, he throws everybody else out into space. All of his crewmates were like on the ship. And then they kind of like lock down the spaceship and they go back to Coruscant. And when they get back, Alfie turns in her adopted mother to the authorities. And then when the adopted mother, who's the head of the Bind Guild, gets turned in, all the ships go to whoever was captain of them at that time. So they go to Leox, and Leox says, oh no, I'm not the captain, Alfie is. So they give Alfie the spaceship at the end. Orla then decides, who's the Wayseeker, decides to go buy a ship. So she buys like this really awesome ship and then just leaves. Reith ends up asking Comac to be his new master, and Comac doesn't like that idea at first, and he doesn't think he'll be a good master because he himself does not really believe in the Jedi Council at this point. He's not sure if he can. And he's like, well, because I have these beliefs, you should be taught by someone with more strong convictions within the Jedi Council. But after some convincing, Master Comac eventually agrees. That's kind of how the book ends. There is a part in the book that talks about like a situation that Orla and Comac were in 25 years prior to this, where they crash on this planet and Comac's master dies, and they're looking for some kidnapped people. They kind of show why Orla becomes a Wayseeker, and it's because this event that happened 25 years earlier, she did not listen to her instincts in the Force, but she listened to what instead the Council said to do, and somebody ended up dying for that. So she, in her mind at this point, is like, I should not be listening to what the Jedi Council says. I should be listening to what the Force is telling me to do, because the Force knows, and like, you do not. So because she believes that the Force told her to do something else, but the Council told her to do the reverse, and somebody ended up dying, that she's also lost faith in the Council, and she needs to go figure it out for herself, whether she believes the Council is still on the path of listening to the Force or if they're not. So
Yeah, that's really interesting because we do see in the prequels that they've become really clinical and like almost like scientific, and a lot of the Force is about listening and feeling the Force rather than, you know, thinking through every single situation rather than just feeling the Force and letting it guide you.
yeah,
Um, so it's really interesting that they're sort of reinforcing that point, and I like that they're going even harder into that because it's such a big thing. I think people miss about that time period, that the Jedi aren't supposed to be these like great paragons of, you know, of everything, and that they're the best thing ever, and they're supposed to be flawed. And it's interesting to see the seeds of the Jedi Council sort of making these kinds of mistakes and then continuing to make these sort of mistakes, because kind of sounds like all the people that are fed up with them kind of just either end up leaving the order or want to leave the order, and then we don't get that change
yeah,
until it's
exactly
too
right.
late.
And it's kind of interesting to see if Qui-Gon Jinn had survived, would he have tried to change the order? Because to me, he feels very similar to Comac. One of Comac's lines in this book, I wrote it down, was that he said, I do not understand how the Jedi can split light from dark. It's all one Force and should be examined and researched at the same time. So he doesn't believe that you can shut off a part of the Force completely. He's like, it's all one Force. You have to let it all flow through naturally. You can't try to split them apart. So he gave me in this book kind of similar like Qui-Gon vibes, where Qui-Gon was like, I don't agree with a lot of the way the Jedi Council does things, but I'm going to try to do it my way and enhance the order.
Right. That is interesting, and it's in a way the Jedi kind of play into the dark side by trying to avoid it
Or
so
suppress
much,
it.
and that's there's a press, and that's not to say that like you should use it, because I think the dark side is just the Force but used for, but feeds off of negative emotions, and I think rather than,
Yeah.
you know, ignoring it,
I think a,
studying
a
it would have been more
problem that
beneficial, because
they
they
were
don't
kind
seem
of
to understand it.
well, what? Yeah, exactly. That's the problem, is they don't understand it. So Comac's all like, we run into the dark side of the Force sometimes, and he's like, I know so little about it, and like using my natural instincts, I can't figure it out. Right? It obscures everything. So he's, in his mind, he needs to understand it better in order to counteract it.
Right, right. It's like they're so cautious that they go outside of being cautious and start to be afraid of it, which is
Yeah.
something that they themselves will teach not to do, but that's definitely what they are. They're scared of the dark side. And don't get me wrong, there are things about it that it definitely makes sense to be cautious of. And you probably don't want to use the Force in that way, but you should at least understand it and know how to resist its influence
Yeah.
on a more practical level, rather than just like, don't feel negative things, let it go, like, you know.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. But that was pretty much the two books, the two first books in the High Republic there, and it's just like, to me, the second book, you know, it started before the event of the hyperspace crisis is what it's called in the books. So, and it goes through to after that's finished, and I think that that theme is going to be a recurring theme throughout a lot of the High Republic media.
Okay. And it looks like the next one, the next adult novel, quote unquote, is The Fallen Star.
Yep.
But and then the young adult novels, I assume we'll probably end up reading too,
Yeah,
are
so there's like I looked at it, there are like 3 or 4 tiers of like adult, young adult, like child or something else comics, I think is what the four were separated into. And I plan on reading all the adult and I think the young adult ones. So the
yeah, yeah.
Into Darkness, the
Young,
second book that I read was a young adult novel, I believe.
yeah, Into the Dark. So you read Light of the Jedi and Into the Dark, and
Correct.
something to note, real quick, not really related to Star Wars specifically, but the term young adult novel is sort of a misnomer. It doesn't really mean that the book isn't mature, doesn't have mature themes, isn't well written. It's more to do with just that it does deal with certain types of relationships more so than adult books do.
Yeah.
Um,
Interesting.
uh, yeah, so it doesn't necessarily mean that it's
Childish.
like yeah, childish. It's more just the writing style tends to be a little easier to parse.
Yeah, I
Like
got you. That makes sense.
Master and Apprentice was a young adult novel technically, but it doesn't. There's nothing about it that really like felt like how you would think. So when I think young adult, I think like Twilight or 50 Shades of Grey or whatever.
50
And
Shades of Grey,
that's
that's what you
not
think when you think young adult?
the writing style. Maybe it's
I think the content of that automatically places
yeah,
it in
maybe not the 50 Shades of Grey,
adult
but like
novel.
Twilight specifically,
No,
or like the
yes,
Vampire
agreed.
Diaries.
Yes. No, no, I
Those
know
are
what you
what I
mean.
think of when I think of young adult, but that's not
Yeah.
necessarily what that means. It's just
Yeah. They can have very adult
sort of
themes in young adult novels.
yeah. So definitely, like if you hear the term young adult novel, people are praising it. Definitely still give it a try. It doesn't mean it's a
Yeah.
bad
I
book,
mean, look
but
at
it's
this one, Into the
you know,
Dark. You know, he
relevant.
threw a bunch of people out of an airlock. That's pretty gruesome for a young adult novel.
Yeah. So young adult is misleading. So just keep that in mind. When you hear, oh, like a lot of really good books are young adult novels. So
Yeah, for sure.
definitely don't sweat that.
I think
Uh,
that about wraps it up for my synopsis of the books. Did you have any questions, or you just kind of taking it in, or you thought, you're excited to see where it goes?
Excited to see where it goes. I'm liking your recaps for me, so I don't have to read all of them.
Yeah, that,
But
that's
no,
that's
it
what
does
I'm here
sound really
for.
interesting, and I'm really hoping that the TV shows start to feed into this more, and we get more High Republic references, sort of in I don't want to say present time because I don't know what present is
Yeah.
in terms of Star Wars right
Well,
now,
I'm
but
relying
like
on you
more
to read
references
a
to it
lot of the
through one
comics
and
for
six.
me. So,
Yeah, that's what I do. I need to start getting into the High Republic comics. It does sound really interesting. There's just so many characters and things I don't know.
yeah,
This kind of gave me a good briefer, and I'll probably start diving into the characters and learning about them, so I have some context
yeah,
going
for
into
sure.
the
I actually
comics.
found the first book a little harder to read just because for me personally, there wasn't a main character. It was like a series of events that were happening, and every like section was kind of like a next step in the events, and there were characters, but it didn't like revolve around anyone or one person's perspective.
Yeah, I think that's the hard part when you're setting up like grand stories or any sort of complicated narrative with a lot of moving parts, because you have to spend time setting it up, and I think it's really difficult to do that in a way that's like still super like well paced and engaging to read. And I think sometimes the setup is worth it. Like I mean, you've seen Breaking Bad. I actually haven't, but I've heard that the beginning of that show is pretty slow, and it's probably
Yes, it
because it has to
is.
spend a lot of time setting a lot of different moving parts up. Same thing with Steins Gate. Like the
Yep.
first like 12
Yep.
episodes of that show were really slow, but then the end is so good that it like makes it worth it. So
Yeah.
I'm willing to bet that the High Republic, the more foundation that there is, the better it's going to be. 'Cause it's hard to remember that like this is the first High Republic stuff we're really seeing. The Old Republic had a whole game and things here and there, and then it got all these novels, and we're starting right out the gate with these novels. And I think that as we expand on it, it's going to get more and more interesting and connect more to different eras of Star Wars. So I'm
Yeah.
excited to see where it goes. It seems really good so far.
Yeah, well, I will definitely keep you updated on the books as I read them, and I'd love to know what anybody else thinks if they have any ideas or opinions on the books and kind of want to talk about it further. I think that's going to wrap it up for us here at the Medium End, though. So Until next time, this is the Media Men signing off.